And thanks to everybody who's in the audience. When Jeff first asked me to come on board with this, I told him there was no way that I could say no. I'm a special agent with the FBI. I've been on board with the FBI for 18 years. I've been an investigator. I've been a task force coordinator. I've been an instructor. And one of the things that I've seen, whether I'm working here domestically, overseas, and I'm sure all the officers in the room can attest to this is needed, and it's desperately needed. And it needs not only the research that we're going to hear from our panelists today, but there's a need for further research. There's a need for further collaboration between our practitioners and our research scholars out in the field. I'm not only a practitioner, but I also had the opportunity to attend the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology program at UPenn. They were kind enough to bring me back as an instructor, so I'm excited to try and see what we can take from that program and bring it back to the FBI to try and develop our own courses in positive psychology for policing, and then see how we can share that with other officers out in the field. I'm not going to take too much time in the beginning because we obviously have a very compressed schedule, but I do want to remind everybody in the audience, all of our contact information for myself, for Dr. Moskowitz, Dr. Salzberg, and Dr. Kern, you can find that all on the webpage. And Jeff made sure he had me plug this 3 or 4 times, so I'll make sure I get it right. I want to remind everyone that you can go to the webpage at resilienceSymposium.org, and you can also check out on social media at Resilience Symposium at Twitter. Did I get it right, Jeff? All right, perfect. So we're going to get on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce each one of the panelists one at a time. If there's a little bit time left at the end, I'm going to kind of wrap up what it is that we heard, and then maybe just give some final thoughts on some things we can look to do going forward, because there's a lot of work that we can do with positive psychology and policing. So our first panelist I'm honored to have the opportunity to introduce is Dr. Judith Moskowitz. We have 2 Judys today, so we're going to do our best not to get confused. Our first Judy Moskowitz, is a professor of medical social sciences at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine, and she also happens to be the president of the International Positive Psychology Association. I think this will be a really important conversation to hear from Judy, because she's going to talk about 2 things. She's going to talk about what positive psychology is. She's also going to talk about what positive psychology isn't. She's going to talk about some of the criticisms that exist about positive psychology, and she's going to talk about the need for empirical research into the field. So without further ado, Judy, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Eric. What a great introduction. Let me see if I can get this working. And there, are you seeing my screen? There. How's that? Is it working? Someone give me a sign. So I can't see.
You're all good.
Okay, great. Thank you. So as Eric said, I'm the president of the International Positive Psychology Association, and I'm also a researcher who studies positive psychological interventions, which are interventions that explicitly target improving emotional well-being compared to more traditional psychological interventions that tend to try to decrease mental health problems. And in these roles as, a researcher of positive psychological interventions and president of IPA, I'm often called upon to sort of defend positive psychology and positive psychological interventions so that it isn't, unicorns and puppies and fairy dust and rainbows. And, a question I've been getting a lot, particularly lately, is, does positive psychology have a role in helping people when there's so much stress that we are all experiencing? So what I want to do in our brief sort of 12 minutes that I have is talk about some of the common criticisms of positive psychology and how to avoid these pitfalls. My plan is to help researchers in the area sort of do better science and present their results so that we really show that there is an empirical basis of the positive psychological work that we do. I know there are non-scientists in the audience, and I want to help you sort of take a critical eye to the number of positive psychological interventions that we see. And maybe you're trying to select a resilience intervention for your workplace. And I hope that I can give you some helpful information to do that. So there are a number of common criticisms of positive psychology that I'm going to go through today. These come from books like Ruth Whitman wrote a book called Anxious in America. Barbara Ehrenreich wrote a book called Bright-Sided, that were both, very well done and extremely critical of positive psychology. So the first issue I'm going to talk about is small effect sizes. Oh, first, actually, before that, let me just give a couple definitions. I already told you what a positive psychological intervention is. These are programs specifically aimed at improving emotional well-being and often consist of things like gratitude or savoring or acts of kindness. The small effects criticism, to understand this, you need to understand what an effect size is. Dr. Sapala mentioned having a large effect size with her SKY program recently. So one of the criticisms is that a lot, and this is true, many of the interventions, positive psychological interventions, are sort of traditionally in the small range. This is Cohen's D as a measure of effect size, and you usually think of 0.2 as small, 0.5 as medium, and 0.8 as large. As an aside, Cohen later in his life was like, I just picked those. They're not written in stone, but the field has gone with it. So meta-analyses of positive psychological interventions, and a meta-analysis combines studies and looks at the effect overall. It's sort of a more powerful way to determine if there's something there. Meta-analyses of positive psychological interventions have shown small effects, basically 0.2, 0.3 range. There was a meta-analysis that was published just in the past few weeks in the Journal of Positive Psychology that is the most comprehensive meta-analysis I have ever seen of positive psychological interventions. And there have been a number at this point. And they looked at the effects of positive psychological interventions, or PPIs, on a number of outcomes: well-being, strengths, quality of life, depression, anxiety, stress. And all of the effects were in the small to maybe medium range. But again, it's true that they were sort of traditionally considered small. So, I want to drill down on this, what a small effect size means, and to help people understand what it means sort of practically. So when you think about something that we all know is related. So aspirin reduces the risk of death by heart attack. So this is pretty well accepted. And I wish we were in a place where you could just shout out what you think the effect size is relating aspirin and reduced risk of heart attack. 0.04, not 0.4, 0.04. So that is like a minuscule effect size. But based on the science, that was big enough for us to recommend that people who've had heart attacks or who are at risk of heart attacks take an aspirin every day. Blood pressure medication and reduced risk of stroke, the effect is also tiny when you look at the effect size. The relationship between ever having smoked and incidence of lung cancer within 25 years, 0.16. I was stunned when I saw this. I thought that effect would be like 0.8. I thought it would be huge. The effect of ibuprofen or like Advil on pain reduction, 0.28. So that one's getting, a little larger. So, when you think about a criticism of small effect size for PPIs, our effect sizes are pretty good and in the range of the association between smoking and lung cancer. There was a really great article that came out 2019 now, about a year or so ago, where they talked about this sort of effect size criticism, in general. And they had some recommendations. Now, this is for the researchers. Always report your effect sizes. So don't just rely on statistical significance. Do studies with larger sample sizes when possible. We have more confidence in the sort of the stability of the effect if it's done in a larger sample. And then report your effect sizes in terms of things that are meaningful in context. So compared to what? Is that compared to what's usually found? Is that a clinically significant decline? So things like that, so that the reader can understand what this effect actually means, sort of practically. So a second criticism is, cherry picking. So this is, when a researcher does a study and collects a whole bunch of outcomes, and one of them turns out well, so that's the one that gets published. This is not unique to positive psychology. This is all certainly behavioral and social science. So for the researchers, you can now, and there's a big movement toward pre-registering your analyses. So you, and in fact, for clinical trials, and this is the US site, the clinicaltrials.gov, that is a public site. And if you are funded by our National Institute of Health, you are required to register your study on that site before you collect your data. So you put up there, here are the things I'm measuring, here's what I expect to find, so that when it's published, and journals now are, when they review your research, are looking at your clinical trials registration and deciding whether, whether you are cherry picking or not. So I recommend presenting and publishing your null findings, which might be easier said than done. Some journals are still sort of old school and really like the sexy, significant findings, but put them all out there. This is what worked, this is what didn't work in this case. Let's figure out why we didn't get an effect in this case, for example. Disclose your funding sources and potential conflicts of interest, because sometimes that becomes a problem. Positive psychology is often criticized for being dismissive of real problems. And these are quotes from Ruth Whitman's book, Anxious in America, or America the Anxious, that it's dismissive of others' often very real problems and all too liable to veer into victim blaming. And, related to that, the criticism is that positive psychology really sees circumstances as, not important. So that's not really, it's really the individual's responsibility. And if you're depressed or you're anxious or you're having a hard time or you have post-traumatic stress symptoms, it's your fault because you didn't think the happy thoughts that you needed to be happy and get through it and be resilient. So first, talking about the sort of the individual solutions that, the criticism that positive psychology is offering in solutions for the individual, when really our problems are systemic and structural. So when you think about, police and first responders, think about the systemic problems that lead to the high rates of burnout and suicide and mental health problems and post-traumatic stress. These high rates aren't because police as a whole are not resilient or they aren't doing the right things to cope with the stress of life or the stress of their jobs. And then the question is, when there are these big systemic problems that, police or anyone has to deal with in lots of situations, how can a positive psychological intervention, something like gratitude, even make a dent in that? And doesn't that just put the blame on the victim for their lack of resilience? We hear this a lot in our program. First started hearing it from physicians and healthcare providers when we were offering them these skills, and they're like, don't give me a Band-Aid here for my burnout. This is because the electronic health record is so burdensome, and this is because I only get 10 minutes with a patient. Like, that's what needs to change. Right? And that is a very valid criticism. My response to that was really well stated by a participant in another program we're doing. We're working with a gun violence prevention group in Chicago and working with the staff who are, exposed to trauma and exposed to violence on practically a daily basis. They live in the neighborhoods of their clients, and they have, again, a lot of sort of systemic problems that you wouldn't expect something like a positive psychological intervention could fix. But this participant, when we were talking about this issue, he made the analogy of it's like a tire with a slow leak, and that if you keep going with this slow leak, eventually you're going to have a flat or you're going to have a blowout. Whereas skills that we teach in positive psychological interventions are like a patch on that slow leak and help you stay engaged and help you continue, takes care of you and helps you be resilient while you either, maybe you can contribute to the solution, the systemic or the societal solution, or maybe it'll just help keep you around till those solutions are solved or made better in some way, those problems are. And then related to that, you know, that circumstances are trivial, that you should just be able to think your happy thoughts out of difficult situations. And this is what my whole program of research has been from the beginning. I started this work studying AIDS caregivers, and this was pre-protease inhibitors, so it was before the most effective treatment. So AIDS was a terminal illness. So these caregivers were caring for a partner who, in most cases, eventually died. So some of the most extreme stress you can imagine. And what we saw in these caregivers is that they were able to experience positive emotion and positive events. And that those who were able to do this actually did better and were more resilient in this most stressful of situations. So based on that work and, you know, positive psychology, positive psychotherapy was really coming online around that point. We put together a set of skills and practices and behaviors, things that people could have in their toolbox to maintain their positive emotion, which then helps them be resilient to whatever stress they're experiencing. We've done a number of studies. I named my studies after mostly plant and flower acronyms, so that's why this slide full of flowers. So we've done a number of versions of this study, a number of delivery modes, you know, in-person, online, self-guided. I'll show you just one result from our studies, and I know that I'm getting close to time here, but I want to show you this slide. So this was a self-guided, online delivered version of the intervention. It takes about 6 weeks. People do it in home practice. The intervention happened right here. We did a baseline assessment. Everyone recruited into the study had elevated depression. That was an entry criteria. So at baseline, everyone was quite depressed. This is a PHQ, is a commonly used measure of depression. This yellow line is the change in depression for people who were in the intervention, who did these skills. So there's an impressive drop. If I just showed you that line, you would say, wow, that intervention totally worked. That was a hit.
Hey, Judy.
Yes.
We have about a little less than 1 minute.
Okay, great. I've got one more slide after this one.
Perfect.
So then we had a comparison group that just did emotion reporting. They also got better. So when you compare the two, overall, they're not different. Both groups improved. But when you look at the effect sizes for the difference between these groups, you find these sort of small effect sizes. This is at immediate post, we had a 0.37 effect size, which is important, and especially when you're talking about something like depression. So wrapping up, I always want to give my not Pollyanna caveat. This program and positive psychology in general is not saying bad things don't happen, that you shouldn't be feeling negative emotions, you should ignore or suppress them. That's not what this was about. Our program in particular is really about all of our abilities to make space alongside the negative for the positive. There are moments of positive emotion, positive events that you can experience, and these skills can help you do that. And that's it.
Perfect. Judy, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have the opportunity now to have our second Judy. This is like a Who's on First skit that we have going on. So we now have Judy Salzberg, who's going to come on next. Dr. Judy Salzberg is the project director of the University of Pennsylvania Positive Psychology Center Penn Resiliency Program. Judy's also an instructor in the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program at UPenn, where she teaches courses in resilience training. What Judy's going to have the opportunity to talk to you about tonight is a really unique and a really interesting program that they're doing. It's through the VALOR Law Enforcement Resilience Training Program, through the Penn Resiliency Program, and it happens to be sponsored in partnership with IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and the Bureau of Justice Assistance. So, Judy, please take it away.
Thank you, Eric. Let me share my slides. How's that looking? We good? Okay. So thank you. As Eric said, I want to acknowledge the project partners here. So BJA is the funder of this project, and through their VALOR program, they wanted to increase their suite of officer safety and wellness programs. And so they worked with IACP, who brought us on as a partner to develop some of the content for this program. Thank you to the other Judy for introducing what positive psychology is, and I love that you also covered what it isn't. We've been working at the Positive Psychology Center at Penn with Marty Seligman, who did one of the keynotes at the beginning of this conference. He's kind of considered the father of positive psychology. And we've been working really, I sometimes say I've been working in positive psychology before it was named that, but we've been working for about 25 years developing, validating, and then eventually disseminating interventions with the goal of both preventing bad stuff, preventing depression, preventing anxiety, but also increasing well-being and increasing resilience. You can see on the screen, there's lots of different populations that we've worked with, but our work primarily started in education, and there are about 30 empirical studies in that group of mostly secondary and higher education. And the results from those studies vary, of course, study by study, but the general pattern is that folks who take the skills of our program have decreases in depression, decreases in hopelessness and other counterproductive thinking patterns that set them up for difficulties, and increases in optimism, self-worth, life satisfaction. Then we started working with the US Army about 10 years ago with Chief of Staff of the Army, Casey, who came to Marty and said, look, we want an Army that's as psychologically fit as it is physically fit. Can you help us to develop a program on that? And so the Master Resilience Training Program was developed with some of the Army performance psychologists and some folks from Penn, and it's still going strong today. We've started working with law enforcement, healthcare, and so forth. And I show these other populations to say that whether you're working with a 14-year-old kid or you're working with a physician or a sergeant in the Army or a law enforcement officer, the skills are essentially the same. The same set of skills that are empirically validated are going to help no matter what population you're in. Although, of course, we do customize population by population. We do end user trainings, but really our preferred model is train the trainer. So the law enforcement model I'll tell you about is train the trainer. And we like it that way because when we train the natural leaders and they go back and train those that they work with shoulder to shoulder, I think the results are even stronger. They're seen as more credible, and they really get the concepts across well. So let me tell you just a little bit about what we teach, how we teach it. First, a working definition of resilience. There are many. This is the one that we use. It's that resilience is the ability to navigate adversity, and that word navigate is intentional, and to grow and thrive in the face of challenges. So navigate has this idea that there's some agency there, that we have some control over the way we think and the way we approach events. And grow and thrive is kind of a nod to post-traumatic growth, that there are people who not just bounce back after something difficult, but over time, they might even grow and they might thrive in the face of challenges. So that's our working definition. This is the program that we built for law enforcement, and we built it with help. So IACP and BJA put together for us an advisory group because we had not worked with law enforcement up until that point much, a little bit, but not that much. And so we worked with this advisory group. We got to do some focus groups and ride-alongs and things like that. And we selected the skills that we thought would be most relevant to law enforcement. And there are 10 of them. We grouped them into 3 different themes. So the first theme is mind. So these are mind skills. In other words, trying to make your thinking work for you rather than against you. And in that mind theme, we've got 4 key skills. So one is learned optimism. That's being able to notice and expect the positive, to be able to put your energy into things that are going to most help you take some purposeful action. The little trap is avoid thinking traps. So these are these counterproductive patterns in thinking that can cause you to miss critical information, and they can cause you to undercut your resilience. The little boxing gloves are a skill called real-time resilience, which is being able to challenge counterproductive thinking in real time using some specific strategies. And then the little chess piece is mental games. So there are times when it's great to take on your thinking and to challenge it, but then there are times that you need to distract from it. And so we like to offer both of those options. So those are our mind skills, heavily based on cognitive behavior therapy, which itself, of course, has about 50 years of empirical support. The second group of skills is are the energy skills. And these skills are targeted to increasing vitality, both across the workday, across a shift, but also across a career. So having enough vitality that you can not just drag yourself back into work the next day, but that you can have a life that is rich in meaning and purpose, and that you have the energy to pursue the things that mean the most to you. The skills we've put under energy are hunt the good stuff, which is our version of gratitude. We've got 2 skills that target physiology directly. It's progressive muscle relaxation and deliberate or tactical breathing. And then the little green column there is character strengths. This is one of the hallmarks of positive psychology, is working from a strengths-based approach. And we spend the better part of the morning helping people to identify their own character strengths, the character strengths in their colleagues, and so forth. So those are the energy skills. The final group of skills are the connection skills, because the short story on resilience, and this is a quote from Chris Peterson about positive psychology actually, is the short story is that other people matter. So other people matter, those who have at least one trusting, abiding relationship are better able to weather the storms of life. And so helping people to really nurture the relationship that they have and to increase their meaningful relationships in their lives are what these skills are targeting. So the first skill is called the ideal model. It's a model for having difficult conversations such that hopefully you're able to address the issue, but also strengthen the relationship in the process. And then the final skill is technically called active constructive responding. This is Shelley Gable is the main researcher on this skill. We call it being a joy multiplier. And in this skill, we encourage people to capitalize on those small moments of positivity that the other Judy was just talking about. Capitalize on those moments of positivity with somebody else, grow them a little bit. So if somebody brings good news to you, something they're proud of, something they observed, whatever it might be, to just stay with that person for a few more minutes, maybe ask a follow-up question, but to really milk that experience for all it's worth. And that can pay huge dividends to relationships in the short run and also in the long run. So that's our suite of 10 skills. We teach it by having, a block of didactic instruction, and then we always split into either pairs or small groups to do some skill practice that's facilitated by our team. So in terms of building now what we're calling agency trainers, these are the folks that go back and train others and serve as subject matter experts back at their agencies. Phase 1 of our training, we deliver the skills to these folks as if they're the end users. So this is typically an on-site 3-day training to cover those 10 skills. And the reason we do that first is because we find that those who use the skills in their own lives are much more credible trainers of the material. And again, with this theme of not being a Pollyanna, it's not that they have to know and love every single skill. It's knowing how the skills work, what can get in the way, and how to get around some of the barriers to using them. The asterisk there is COVID, so on-site is not going to be possible for our next batch of trainings, but we're going to deliver these trainings virtually. So after that phase 1, in the second phase, there's a period of several months, and they do some pre-work. So they increase their depth of knowledge of the skills, they practice the skills with guidance from our team, and then they come back for a 4-day train the trainer experience where they're delivering the skills using this very thick modularized curriculum that's manualized and gives them plenty of trainer instructions, and they teach the skills and get feedback from the team. So here's what we've accomplished so far in the program. We've developed this curriculum for law enforcement. We've developed this train the trainer manual, and that manual is going to enable the dissemination at the unit level. So the skills are modularized in like 90-ish minute blocks. So whether you have a 3-day training, as Norfolk Police Department recently did, they did this in their first week of the academy, that's great. It can also be a space training where the skills are delivered and people have time to practice them in between. Both models are good. I want to acknowledge the 3 pilot agencies that we delivered this training to initially and helped us with their very honest feedback. The first was the Norfolk Police Department. The second was the Lincoln, Nebraska Police Department, and then the South Dakota Highway Patrol. So in summary, it's important to me that we say what this program isn't as well as what it is. This is a very difficult time in law enforcement, and there's need for all kinds of different trainings, but this is not the be all and end all. So this is not a suicide prevention program. And most importantly, it's not a treatment program or a crisis intervention. It's a prevention program. And one reason I think that's so important is that it's a prevention program that's delivered universally, so people get exposure to these skills, and maybe that helps to circumvent some of the stigma they might have about going to see a mental health provider. Maybe they get this exposure, they get this appetizer, and then they realize, oh, that's what it is, and they're more willing to go and talk to their peer support team or go to the clinician if they need to. And maybe for some people, this is all they need in order to deal with some of the stressors that are inherent in the life of law enforcement. So the program's targeted to individuals, although we talk about trying to create a culture of resilience and well-being. It includes practical life skills that help people to navigate adversity and try to prevent some of the anxiety and depression that can come from the stressful lifestyle, increase resilience and well-being. And what I like about it too is that it's relevant to different stages of a law enforcement officer's career. So the folks who just took this in the academy at Norfolk probably are using different examples and applying it differently than folks who are perhaps getting ready to retire. Conditions for success. So the goal again is to create a culture of resilience and well-being, not just to have a good, in-service training. And a few things we know, this is based on our experience with the Army, where it was a very, very large scale rollout, is we know that this has to be at the right time for an agency. So priorities, sometimes there might be other priority issues that need to be addressed first in order for the program to be successful. Also need command commitment, and that's shown by picking a strong liaison, a strong cadre of trainers who are gonna deliver this program with enthusiasm and with fidelity. It's clearing enough space on the training calendar so that there's an effective dosage. This is not an hour-long program. These are skills that take practice. And then it's having a well-thought-out implementation strategy for both formal training, classroom training with PowerPoint, but also informal training and coaching. Some of this is happening with the peer support team. A lot of the trainers who are coming to be agency trainers are actually peer support teams. So they can infuse some of the skills into their peer support sessions. Finally, things you can do now is if you want to learn more about positive psychology, resilience, optimism, this slide is some of our favorite books. I recommend all of them. The Resilience Factor, Dennis Charney and Southwick's book is on there as well. Some of Seligman's books, books on character strengths, gratitude, and so forth. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of reading and some things that you can learn more. So let me turn it back over to you, Eric.
Judy, thanks very much. Our final panelist for the evening is going to be Dr. Peggy Kern. Peggy's an associate professor at the University of Melbourne Center for Positive Psychology. And Peggy's going to be discussing with us the importance of maintaining mental fitness in our personal and professional lives. And this session is going to illustrate how easy strategies for individuals and agencies can draw on to proactively support mental health and well-being. Peggy, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Eric. And it's a pleasure to be joining you. For me this morning here in Melbourne, Australia, and wherever you are joining this morning. So real pleasure to be joining you and sharing a bit. To begin, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land on which I live and work, the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of the land. I pay my respect to the elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to Aboriginals and other Indigenous people who might be joining today. So when we really start to think about the times that we're navigating, and I know here in Australia, we've been in pretty strict lockdown for the past 8 weeks, and there's a lot of challenges and stresses, and we know that mental health issues are a growing concern, and we want to prevent and give people the skills that can help them from reaching that point of breakdown. And as both of the Judy spoke to, is some of the things that we do in positive psychology, they're not meant to treat mental illness, and they're preventative in nature. So we're really trying to give people the skills that they need so that they actually can function well. And so when I think about a lot of the different activities and things that we might do within coming from the positive psychology area, I'm really thinking about these are ways of strategies we can engage in everyday life. And I like to think about them as sort of habits and ways of thinking that can help us navigate some of the challenges that are there. Now, there are times that those challenges do become overwhelming and we do need to get additional help and support. So this is not sort of a fix-all, but we're thinking about how we can do what we can within our context in order to navigate things well. The way I like to think about this is in terms of building mental fitness. So when I like to be an athlete, and so I do quite a bit of exercise and whatnot. Now to stay fit, I actually have to engage in activity. And so I can't just, not do anything and then just be fit. I actually have to, whether it's running or going, well, I can't go to the gym now, but we used to go to the gym before restrictions. And so you actually engage in activity so that you can actually stay fit. And so we think about that from a physical side, but the same thing from a mental side is that there are a lot of negative pressures all around us that we're always having to deal with. And so we need to keep ourselves mentally fit in order to be able to really navigate the challenges that are there so that we can stay strong. And like I said, in the same way that I can stay physically fit, but there are still times that our bodies break down and then we need to go to the doctor and get additional support. At the same time, our pressures can overwhelm us mentally, but there's a lot that we can do to keep ourselves as well as possible along the way. A lot of my work in this area builds upon Professor Seligman's PERMA model. So he defines flourishing in terms of 5 different pillars: positive emotion, engagement, relationship, meaning, and accomplishment. And in a lot of my work with this model, I've added in the H for physical health. And so using that sort of PERMA acronym and really thinking about how we can use this to come up with simple sort of fitness or well-being workouts we can engage in to help us as we continue to navigate the challenges of life. And so here are a few ways that I like to think about setting up our well-being workouts in ways that perhaps can be useful as we continue to build that mental fitness. So as a starting place, it's helpful to identify where are we in terms of these different PERMA domains. And I like to think about it as sort of a profile of I might be higher and lower in these different areas at different times. And so where am I? And what does that actually look like? Over the years, I've developed a measure, the PERMA Profiler, which gives you scores across these different dimensions. And you can go online. We've put it at the PERMA survey website. So you can take a little survey and you get your profile. Oftentimes you might be higher or lower. Now, there's no one right score. So there's not, this is flourishing. I think oftentimes people think they want to be a 10 out of 10 on things. We actually see that most people are, if they're functioning well, they get between about a 7 and 8 on different dimensions. But it's going to be different for different people depending on what you value. And so you can get identify where you are on those different pillars. And then it's helpful to reflect on your results. What is your profile like and what draws your attention? I like to think about it as, what do I actually value? So for some people, they really care a lot about relationships. And if I find that my relationships are really low, then perhaps that's an area that I actually really want to work on in order to make sure that I keep that area strong. If I'm actually happy with my profile, then perhaps I want to pick one of those areas so that I can keep building skills and habits and things so that I can keep that strong, so that when those challenges hit, I have those go-tos. I know what to do because I've been practicing and training that over time. So once we get our results, then it's helpful to select a domain to focus on. I like to select one domain because if we try to do everything, then it can oftentimes become overwhelming. And so by focusing on one area, that lets us start training and building almost those muscles in our areas, and then we can spread out to other areas with the ultimate goal of really developing sort of an entire tool set that can help us at different times along the way. And so pick a domain to focus on, and then it's helpful to start engaging in some different activities. There's throughout the positive psychology literature, there's a lot of different activities. Some are called positive psychology interventions or positive behaviors. There are different ways we can phrase these. So there's a lot of resources out there. And we want to try out different things because different things will work for different people. I kind of go back to that gym analogy is that, you know, I might go to the gym and the trainer tells me, these are all the exercises you can do. And I start trying them out. And I very quickly identify that there are some things that I really like, and there are some that I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. And so I want to find the things that are going to be a good fit for me so that I'll actually do them. So thinking about the different PERMA domains, these are some different activities that we can think about. So for instance, in terms of positivity, so building up some of that positive emotion despite all of the negative that is all around us. Both of the Judys spoke to gratitude. And so noticing and appreciating the good things in and around us. And especially when there's so much going wrong and it's so easy to identify all of the bad that's there, by purposely looking at the little good things that are there, it really does take us out of that negative cycle, that negative way of thinking, to actually notice that there are good things that are actually there. I know as we've been going through lockdown, just having bits of spring appear is just such an amazing thing that actually just brings a lightness to the day, despite some of the challenges that might be there. Thinking about, for instance, meaning, spending time in nature, or even if it's just a park or something that's actually green, it takes us beyond ourselves and actually kind of seeing where we fit in all of this. That gives us a sense of purpose. In terms of thinking about accomplishment, one thing we find is something called a hope map. And so we can identify, these are the goals I want to set. These are the pathways that I'm going to take to get there. And this is what I'm going to use to actually support and help me to get there. And so there are different activities that we might select and we might play with. And so then what we want to do is actually create a routine. And so I like to think about this is my well-being workout. And so maybe I'm going to actually engage in one or more activities and purposely do it each day. Maybe at the end of each day, I actually write down what are a few things that I'm grateful for. Maybe if I'm in a staff meeting, I might actually go around and point out a strength that each person in the room has, and it just changes the entire way that the room is functioning together. And so we can start bringing these into our everyday life, and then we want to see how it's working. And so, try things out. Is this working for me? No, it's not actually working for me. So actually I need to find some other activities to do. Or maybe those activities are not the right thing at this right time, because we actually need to draw on these different skills at different times. The key is to try different things so that we actually develop an entire tool set of things that we can draw on at times when perhaps I'm being pulled into that more negative way of thinking, or perhaps my relationships are starting to struggle more, or perhaps, physically I actually need to build my physical health. Now, like I said, importantly, this is not about quick fixes. This is being proactive in nature. It's about developing a toolkit of skills, regularly supporting our mental fitness. In the same way, for my physical fitness, it's not going to be helpful when I'm sick to actually then be trying to build my fitness then. We need to do this when we're actually functioning well so that we have the tools that we need to draw on as we continue to navigate these times. So it's not simple interventions or silver bullets, but it's about developing positive habits, mindsets, and skills that serve us, and that also serve those that we work with as well. And the more that they become habits, they become automatic. So it's our go-to in times of challenge, as opposed to taking us to some of those more perhaps negative ways of thinking and being and doing. I know from my own experience as we've been navigating this period, I'm actually quite grateful that I have this entire toolkit to draw on. And as I work with others in terms of teaching them about the different positive psychology activities, and they get excited about things, it then builds me up as well. And so by having these tools, then we're better able to deal with some of those challenges that are there. Again, there are times that everything becomes too much when those pressures are around us, and we actually need to be focusing on those contextual issues and removing those stresses. So this is not a fix-all, but perhaps it can be helpful within all of this. So all that I've talked about here today comes from a book that I wrote with my colleague, Dr. Michelle McQuaid, and it just talks about a lot of these activities. And so perhaps that's one place to start. There's a lot of resources online as well to help you along the way. So I hope this provides a few insights into not only how to maintain physical fitness, but also mental fitness. So thank you so much, and I wish you well on your journey.
Perfect. Peggy, thank you very much. To Judy, to Peggy, we thank you for what you were able to share with the group. And to the officers and to the practitioners that are in the audience, I think to summarize what we heard is, we heard for officers how to put the oxygen mask on themselves. And that's something that we need to do. And we need to do it as husbands. We need to do it as wives. We need to do it as squad mates who are good teammates in our units and our squads. And what this affords us is the opportunity to better improve our own individual levels of well-being. And when we do that, we're improving our level of self-awareness. What are our thoughts? What are our emotions? And when we've done that, well, then we can operationalize that as officers. We can then transition to understanding the thoughts and the perspectives of other people. And that's how we protect, and that's how we serve, because that's what our job is. Our job is to be able to go out into our communities, no matter what your position is within your police department, and our job is to serve. And right now, that's a challenge like no other time in law enforcement. I've been in for 18 years, and I've never experienced anything like this. I've talked to some of my other colleagues who have been in. There is an us versus them division, unfortunately, in certain communities that exists. We need to teach these skill sets to our officers so we can teach them how do we put the oxygen mask on such that we can go out and we can serve those folks. So Jeff, I'm going to turn this back over to you, but to Judy, and to Peggy, thank you so much for letting me be a part of this. And Jeff, to you, to NYPD, and to Columbia, thank you for putting this together. On behalf of law enforcement, this is much needed. We hope to continue to have more collaboration like this in the future.